You have 48 hours to remove it, she said, or the board will remove it for you. I stared at the woman standing on my driveway holding a tape measure like a weapon, and I realized something. She had no idea what she'd just started. My name doesn't matter much for this story, so let's just say I'm the guy in the blue house on Larkspur Court, third one from the cul-de-sac. The one with the good tomatoes and the patio furniture that apparently threatened the very foundations of civilized society. 6 months ago, none of this would have made sense to me either. I bought my house on Larkspur Court 2 years ago. It's a modest neighborhood, the kind with sidewalk chalk in the summer and string lights on the porches in December, 60-some homes wrapped around a shared green space with a fountain nobody remembers turning on. I liked it because it felt lived in, real. The kind of place where your neighbor waves instead of just nodding. The Homeowners Association ran things quietly for most of that time. Landscaping standards, trash can placement, the occasional reminder about holiday lights coming down by January 15th. Nothing dramatic. I paid my dues, mowed on schedule, and mostly forgot the HOA existed at all. Then Diane Halloway became board president. Diane moved into the neighborhood 18 months ago, into the big colonial on Birchwood with the wraparound porch she never sits on. Within 3 months, she had a seat on the board. Within 6, she was president. I want to be fair here, some of what she pushed through wasn't unreasonable. Nobody wants a boat rotting in a driveway for 4 years. But somewhere along the way, maintaining standards turned into something else. Something that looked a lot like control for its own sake. I noticed it first with the Ferraros 2 doors down. Their mailbox post was painted the wrong shade of black, not black enough, apparently, and they got a violation letter within a week of Diane's first board meeting. Then it was the Kim family's basketball hoop, deemed a persistent eyesore despite standing in that exact spot for 9 years. Little things, petty things, but relentless. I told myself it wouldn't touch me. I kept my lawn edged, my trash cans hidden, my porch light bulb the approved warm white instead of the daylight blue the bylaws apparently despised. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in April. I was refilling the bird feeder when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me, deliberate ones, the kind that want you to hear them coming. I turned around and there was Diane, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up into hair that never seemed to move in the wind, standing at the edge of my patio like she'd been sent to inspect a crime scene. "This furniture," she said, gesturing at my patio set, a simple 4-piece outdoor sectional in a warm gray weave, the kind you'd find in half the catalogs in America, "is not compliant with community aesthetic standards." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. "She wasn't compliant with what exactly?" I asked. "Approved outdoor furnishings," she said like she was reciting scripture. "Wicker or wood tones only in earth palette colors, that gray is going to need to go." I told her I'd bought the set 8 months earlier, that no one had said a word about it, that half the block had similar pieces on their own patios. She wasn't interested. She snapped 2 photos with her phone, made a note on her clipboard, and told me I'd be hearing from the board shortly. Then she left the way she came, gravel crunching under expensive sandals without so much as a goodbye. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead. Violation code 432, 30-day compliance window, threat of a $200 fine if I didn't remove or replace the furniture. I read it twice standing at my own mailbox, genuinely confused, because nowhere in 2 years of living here had furniture color ever come up as a rule, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I went and got the actual bylaws. Not the friendly little newsletter summary the board mails out every spring. The real ones. The full, notarized, recorded with the county declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS that I'd been handed in a folder at closing and never once opened. I dug it out of a filing cabinet in my garage, blew the dust off, and started reading Section 4, Exterior Standards and Improvements, line by line. There was language about fencing, language about paint colors on the house exterior, language about visible storage in vehicles. Nothing, not one sentence, not one clause, not one footnote about patio furniture material, style, or color. I read it 3 times to be sure. Then I read the Rules and Regulations supplement, the one the board is allowed to amend without a homeowner vote, in case Diane's furniture rule had snuck in there instead. Still nothing. Which meant Diane had just invented a rule on the spot in my backyard and mailed me a fine for breaking it. I want to tell you I stayed calm the whole time. I didn't. I'll be honest, that first night, I sat at my kitchen table with the CC and RS open in front of me and felt something close to rage, the quiet kind that doesn't yell but doesn't forget either. Because this wasn't really about a patio set. It was about a woman deciding on a whim that she could rewrite the rules for 60 families and nobody would check her math. So I decided to check her math. I emailed the HOA management company the next morning and requested, in writing, the specific bylaw section supporting violation code 432 as applied to outdoor furniture. I copied Diane. I copied the board's secretary, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Marguerite who I suspected had no idea half of what was happening under Diane's signature. I kept my email short, polite, and completely without emotion, because I already knew the emotion would come from her side, not mine. Diane responded within 2 hours, not the management company, Diane herself from her personal email, which told me everything I needed to know about how official this rule actually was. The board has discretion to interpret aesthetic compliance as it sees fit, she wrote. Your furniture is out of character with the neighborhood. I'd encourage you to resolve this quickly before it escalates. Before it escalates, as if I was the one escalating anything. I read that line 4 times and each time it made less sense as anything other than a threat. I wrote back one sentence, please cite the specific bylaw section, I'll wait. She didn't answer, not that day, not the next. Instead, 5 days later, a second letter arrived, this one heavier than the first. The 30-day window had somehow shrunk to 2 weeks. The $200 fine was now framed as a first assessment, with language about continuing violations and additional penalties, and buried in the third paragraph, a mention of a potential lien on my property if fines went unpaid long enough. A lien. Over a gray patio sectional that matched half the porches on the street, I stood in my kitchen holding that letter and felt the whole thing shift from annoying to something else, something with actual stakes. Because a lien isn't a slap on the wrist, it's a mark on your home, the kind that shows up in title searches, the kind that can complicate a sale or a refinance years down the road. Diane wasn't just being petty anymore. She was threatening my property based on a rule she'd made up in my backyard, and she seemed to think nobody would push back hard enough to matter. That was her first real mistake. I called Marguerite directly that afternoon, the retired teacher secretary whose name was on half the paperwork but whose voice, when she finally answered, sounded tired in a way that told me she already had doubts about where this was heading. I asked her one question, does the board have a written vote authorizing furniture color restrictions on record anywhere? There was a long pause, then she said quietly, not that I'm aware of. That was all I needed. I thanked her, hung up, and started building a file. Over the next few days I pulled everything. The full CC and RS highlighted and tabbed, the rules and regulations supplement, same treatment. The 2 violation letters side by side showing the shrinking compliance window and the escalating threats. Photos of at least 6 other homes on the block with gray, black, and even navy patio furniture sitting in plain view, completely unbothered by any violation notice. Screenshots of Diane's own email admitting the board was relying on discretion, not an actual rule. And then, almost by accident, I found the piece that changed everything. Buried in my closing documents from 2 years earlier was the original HOA disclosure packet, the one every buyer receives before signing. Attached to it, dated 14 months before I even moved in, was the board's own record of the last time the rules and regulations had been formally amended, a signed, notarized document listing every change made that year. Furniture was never mentioned. Not once in 14 months had this rule existed anywhere except inside Deanne Holloway's head, and now apparently on my violation notice with a $200 price tag attached. I had her. I just needed the right room to say it in. Our HOA bylaws require an annual open meeting where homeowners can raise disputes directly with the board, on the record, with minutes taken by the secretary. The next one was 11 days away. I marked the date, printed my file, made 6 copies, and started rehearsing exactly what I was going to say, not with anger, but with the kind of calm precision that leaves no room for anyone to talk their way out of it. The night before the meeting, I got a text from a neighbor 2 streets over, someone I barely knew, asking if the rumor was true that I was fighting the board over patio chairs. I laughed for the first time in 2 weeks. Word travels fast in a place like this. What nobody knew yet was how this was actually going to end. The community room was packed that Thursday night, more homeowners than I'd ever seen at one of these meetings, folding chairs pulled out to the walls to fit everyone. I found out later that Diane's furniture crusade had touched at least 4 other households in the weeks before mine, and word had gotten around that someone was finally showing up with paperwork, instead of just paying the fine and moving on. Diane opened the meeting from behind the folding table at the front, flanked by 2 board members and Marguerite, who wouldn't quite meet my eyes. When new business came up, I stood, walked to the small podium they'd set up near the coffee station, and set my folder down with a deliberate, unhurried thud. I'd like to address Violation Notice 432, issued to my property regarding patio furniture, I said. I have some questions for the board. Diane's expression didn't change much, but her hand tightened slightly around her pen. We can discuss it after the meeting, she said. With respect, I said, the bylaws state homeowner disputes go on the record during open session. I'd like that followed. A murmur went through the room. Marguerite, to her credit, nodded slightly and made a note. I read the violation code aloud. Then I opened the CC and RS to Section 4 and read, word for word, every clause governing exterior standards, none of which mentioned furniture. I held up the rules and regulations supplement and did the same. Then I held up the notarized amendment record from 14 months before I moved in, the one proving no furniture rule had ever been formally added, and asked the board directly, under which authorized amendment was this violation issued? Silence. Real silence, the kind that fills a room. The board has discretion, Diane started, echoing her email almost word for word, but one of the other board members, a quiet man named Harold who I'd never heard speak at a meeting before, cut in. Discretion isn't the same as a rule, Diane, he said. If it's not in the CC and RS or the supplement, we can't find someone for violating it. I laid the photos on the table next, 6 other homes, same gray and black furniture tones, 0 violation notices issued. If this is a genuine standard, I said, why is it only being enforced at my address and at 3 others I've since confirmed happened after a personal dispute with the board president? That landed harder than I expected. A woman near the back, one of the 4 other households, it turned out, stood up on her own and said her family had gotten an almost identical letter 3 weeks after she declined to volunteer for Diane's spring beautification committee. Another homeowner near the front said the same thing had happened to him after he'd questioned a landscaping bid at a previous meeting. Diane's composure finally cracked. This is completely inappropriate, she said, voice rising. I built this board. I set these standards to protect property values, and I won't be lectured by people who don't understand community governance. You didn't set a standard, I said. You made a rule up, mailed me a fine, and threatened a lien on my house over a piece of furniture that isn't mentioned anywhere in any document I signed. That's not governance. That's overreach. The board called for an immediate vote, required under our bylaws, whenever a documented dispute is raised in open session with supporting evidence. It wasn't close. 4 votes to rescind the violation notice against me and against the 3 other flagged households, with Diane casting the lone vote to uphold it. Harold, visibly uncomfortable, made a motion that the board formally review all violation notices issued in the past 6 months for consistency with the actual recorded bylaws, a motion that passed just as decisively. I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time in weeks. Diane didn't say another word for the rest of the meeting. She sat there, jaw tight, staring at the folding table while Marguerite read the minutes into record, including, verbatim, the board's admission that the furniture violation had no basis in the governing documents. Word moves fast in a neighborhood like ours, and by the following weekend, it had turned into something close to a small legend on the block. The 3 other households whose coincidental violations got tossed out that night started talking, and it turned out the pattern went back further than any of us realized. Nearly a year of quiet, selective enforcement aimed at anyone who'd crossed Diane in some small, personal way. Within a month, the board, minus Diane, notably, who'd stopped attending after that meeting, brought in an outside management consultant to audit every open violation on file. Nearly a third of them were dismissed outright for the same reason as mine: no supporting language in the actual bylaws. The board also passed a new rule of its own, almost comically overdue, requiring any future violation to cite the exact governing clause in writing before a letter could even go out. Diane resigned as board president 2 months later. Officially, it was to focus on personal matters. Unofficially, 3 separate people told me she'd been quietly asked to step down after the audit results came back. Once the other board members realized how much liability her one-woman rulemaking had exposed the whole HOA to. She still lives on Birchwood. We wave sometimes. It's polite, it's distant. It's exactly what it should be. My patio furniture is still gray. It still sits on my patio, right where it always did, and every so often I catch myself glancing at it and almost laughing at how close I came to just quietly replacing it to avoid the hassle. I didn't, because somewhere in those 2 weeks I stopped being angry about the chairs and started caring about something bigger. The idea that a governing document exists to protect everyone equally, or it doesn't mean anything at all. If there's a lesson in any of this, it's not really about patio furniture or HOAs or even Diane. It's this: rules only have power when someone's willing to actually read them. The moment I stopped assuming the letter in my mailbox was automatically legitimate and started asking to see it in writing, the whole thing fell apart in about 20 minutes in a room full of folding chairs. So if you've ever gotten one of those letters, the kind that shows up official and threatening and just a little too convenient, do yourself a favor. Go find the actual document, read it yourself. You might be surprised how much of it was never really there at all. If this story hit home for you, you already know why. Drop a comment if your neighborhood has its own Diane. I promise you're not the only one. And if you want more of these, stick around, because this is far from the last time the rulebook is going to win.